Morning. So the coffee did just get here, and Lauren's setting that and the snacks up. So while I'm talking, just feel free to go help yourself. You won't be interrupted or anything like that. So welcome again. My name is Rachael Holstege, and I'm the Associate Curator here at the Flint Institute of Arts. And today, as you know, I'm going to be speaking about the Imperial Chinese Robes. 3 of them that are in the museum's permanent collection, and 2 that are currently on view in our Arts of Asia gallery. Before I get into it, I do want to invite you for our lecture next month. Is going to be by Curator of Collections and Exhibitions Sarah Cohn, and she's going to be talking about Sophie Matisse's painting of Guernica, which is right out in the lobby when you walk in here, so that will surely be a great lecture. So as I said during this lecture, I'm going to discuss 3 Chinese robes in the museum's permanent collection that date back to the Qing Dynasty, specifically the 18th century. And so, as I said, 2 of those robes are on view right now. And we also just reinstalled last week our Arts of Asia gallery. So all of the artwork in there right now is all from the Chinese dynasties, and we did this to complement the robes. So it's sort of a special installation, whereas usually we have all different Asian cultures represented in there. And so I'm just going to briefly tell you the story about how these robes became on view, because they're on view for the first time in 50 years, or since the FIA has owned them. So it's kind of significant. In January of 2021, the museum had an expert in Chinese art come and evaluate that portion of our collection. And this included several robes and textiles. And we showed them these robes, but we didn't have a lot of information on them. So they weren't something that we thought was very significant, because we just didn't know. And when these experts saw these robes, they were kind of floored by them. And they let us know that they are incredibly significant, and so that really drove us to want to get them on view as soon as possible. So the museum applied for a grant, and we earned the grant, and that included conservation of several of the robes, as well as the building of 2 new permanent cases in the galleries that can house textiles. Because that was one of our challenges with showing these as well, is they're very large pieces of art, and you can't just throw them up anywhere. So we didn't have a place to show them. So this also gave us the opportunity to build these cases. So on the left here is the Thompson Gallery before, so we removed these smaller wedges. And here we see the current on the right, and then on the other side of the gallery is another identical case, which holds the other robe. So as we talk about the robes, I'm going to first talk about the dynastic system in which they're made, because this is another thing that we're really focusing on in the gallery there, and how significant the dynastic system was for over 4,000 years in China. So according to the dictionary, a dynasty is a line of hereditary rulers of a country, and other countries that have used a dynastic system have been Iran, Egypt, and the contemporary House of Windsor in England could be considered a dynasty. So in China, the first dynasty began over 4,000 years ago, before the Common Era in 2100. It evolved from various tribal settlements along the Yellow and the Yangtze River, an area that is really known as one of the cradles of the Chinese civilization. And these tribes at the time were all under separate rule until they were united under a man named Yu the Great. And so in this image here, we have the territory in pink of the Shah dynasty, and you can see it's right in that area of those rivers. So Yu the Great, who was he and how did he unite this first empire? So he was the ruler of the Shah, who weren't this great dynasty that they were. And he came to power because of his work in flood control. So because they were on these 2 rivers, the area was very much prone to flooding, and so the area was not thriving socially or economically because of this. So you implemented a series of irrigation canals that relieved floodwater, and it also dispersed it into fields, which increased the agriculture in the area. And so with these new systems in place and not flooding anymore, the social and economic aspect of the area was increasing. And he rose up as the ruler of the Shah and united these sort of disparate territories. So before his death, Yu named his son the successive ruler, and so that right there established the dynasties. And this dynastic system would rule for the next 4,000 years in China. So, and this is important to think about the robes when we consider the robes, because the robes really reinforce the idea of the emperor as the center of the universe and the son of heaven. And this dynastic cycle and mandate of heaven really established that idea. So, so how did these rulers legitimize their rule? And through these various dynasties, who came into the major power? So what they did is they subscribed to a mandate called the Mandate of Heaven. And this is a philosophy that was used to legitimize the power by stating that heaven, or the universe, bestows upon the ruler their right to rule. So this philosophy was not around during the beginning dynasties and was established during the Zhao, 1,000 years later after the Shah. And they established it to legitimize their overthrow of the previous Qing Dynasty. So by saying that they were chosen by heaven, so this would reinforce their right to be ruling. And because this was something that was chosen by heaven, it's not something that could be easily contested by anyone. So on the screen you can see this is the dynastic cycle that almost all of the dynasties kind of follow to a T, which basically the dynasty comes in, they claim the mandate of heaven, they prosper as a dynasty for many years, but then as many things happen, there's a downfall in the culture, economy, society, and then there becomes sort of these gaps in rule, and then another dynasty comes in, seizes that power, and claims the mandate of heaven for themselves. And then the cycle resets. So this happened for those 4,000 years. So from the Shah for the next 4,000 years, there would be 13 major dynasties with 70 additional minor, and a total of 559 emperors. The dynastic cycle would end in 1911, when due to a series of internal rebellions and Western external threats, the last dynasty, the Qing Dynasty, would come to an end. And on January 1st, 1912, the country was proclaimed the Republic of China. And 37 years later, in 1949, communist leader Mao would declare it the People's Republic of China, which is the name that remains today. So I promise we'll get to the robes very soon. But first we need to talk about the dynasty in which they were made, the Qing Dynasty. And it's important for many reasons. So as we know from the dynastic cycle that we talked about, the rise of the Qing Dynasty had to come from the fall of the previous dynasty, the Ming Dynasty. So the transition from Ming to Qing was a decades-long period of conflict between the Qing, who were a Manchu tribe, and the reigning Ming Dynasty. So the Manchu tribe originated in northeast China and specialized in hunting, agriculture, and animal husbandry. After the overthrow of the Ming Dynasty, the Manchu tribe united as one to create the Qing. And on the screen, you'll see is the final emperor of the Ming Dynasty on the left, and the first emperor of the Qing Dynasty there on the right. The Qing successfully established a foreign leadership because they were Manchu, as where most people in the Ming Dynasty identified as Han. So they really came up as a minority, and they tried to establish themselves throughout their time still as separate from this other culture, wanting to maintain a clear line between themselves and the indigenous Han. So the Qing Dynasty would reign for 268 years, with 11 different emperors ruling during that time, all from the same familial line. But the height of the Qing Dynasty came during the 18th century with the reign of Emperor Qianlong, who we're going to be talking about today. and he's the emperor under which these robes were created. So he was the 5th emperor of the Qing Dynasty, named Qianlong, and he inherited the rule from his father at the age of 24. His father had previously ruled for 13 years and left the empire a prosperous and a peaceful country for his son. Qianlong would go on to rule for 61 years, which was the same amount of time that his grandfather, prior to his father, had ruled. Qianlong was a strong military leader, but he also worked towards the advancements of Chinese culture and, in particular, preserving the Manchu heritage. Feeling that the Manchu culture was being forgotten by his reign and that there was a lack of cohesion in the empire, in 1759, Emperor Qianlong codified the regulations of imperial dress with a manuscript titled The Illustrated Regulations for Ceremonial Paraphernalia of the Present Dynasty. Quite a mouthful. So the 18-chapter illustrated document, laid out regulations covering subjects such as ritual vessels, astronomical instruments, and regalia used in governing and state occasions. In particular, there was a very long section on the dress of emperors, princes, noblemen, their consorts, as well as Manchu officials and their wives. The clothing system of Imperial China was viewed as an important constituent of a civilized society. Rulers recognized the unifying and harmonizing effects that a dress code might give their subjects, and each new dynasty introduced its own code to symbolize their power, and the Qing Dynasty was no exception. The early emperors established the refined dress code, while Emperor Qianlong regulated and enshrined it into their rules. A loosening of the dress code laws would be seen as symptomatic of decline, which we know with that cycle they did not want. So on the screen here are a few pages, examples from that document. The emperor hired artists to create these detailed drawings so that there was no room for anyone to do anything other than what was regulated. And of concern to us, within this code of dress, there are 5 categories of formal wear, and each category was then further divided into summer and winter garments because of the climate. And it was also laid out what colors were appropriate for who to wear, and also what motifs could be included on the robes as well, based on your rank. So included in the document is this preface by the emperor at the beginning, and basically it goes on where he says that the prior dynasties, because they changed things up from their ancestors, that was their downfall, and that by maintaining the course that your ancestors laid out, that would be the path to success. And you can see that last line there, do not change our traditions or reject them. Beware, take warning. So this was very significant, and it was a very important aspect of the culture. So on the screen are all examples from the document, save for this one in the top right. So unfortunately, the document is not fully intact today, and so this one is actually an example of that dress, but not from the original document. So the first type of dress outlined on the upper left there is the chow pao, or official court robe. It is ranked highest among the formal wear and worn during important rituals and court assemblies, such as an ascension to the throne, imperial weddings, birthdays, and sacrifices to heaven, earth, and the ancestors. Next on the right there is a jifu, or festive dress. This also can be translated to auspicious or lucky dress. The festive dress is less formal than the official dress, and worn on happy occasions such as festivals or imperial banquets. And the robes were always these very vibrant colors to express joy and celebration. Next on the right is the qingfu, or the regular dress. This was worn when the previous 2 dresses would be inappropriate, such as a somber occasion. And you can see there, it's sort of plain, not a lot of detail or color, so it would be appropriate for a more subdued situation. Next is the shinfu on the bottom left here, and that was worn for traveling. or during long huntings, or long excursions or hunting. It was a wider fit than the other ones to facilitate movement and riding on horses. And lastly is the military wear, which was worn for military ventures. So another significant thing is that the Manchu actually changed the cut and style of the robes from the previous Qing Dynasty. Because they were this traveling tribe that specialized in hunting, they really needed robes that would facilitate that. And the Qing Dynasty robes were cut thinner and were not great for this. So what they did is they extended the fit on this to make it wider and did a larger slit down the middle to facilitate movement. And then you'll also see on the sleeves here, they have these ribbed pieces, which you'll see more on our robe, that also would facilitate movement when riding a horse. And then there are these cuffs that look like a horse hoof that would lay over the hand when riding a horse to protect the wearer from the elements. Like the style of dress, color was very important and would indicate rank based on the individuals. The color system that was laid out came from the Chinese philosophy of the 5 elements. So we have yellow in the center, symbolizing the earth as the center of the universe. And this was a color reserved exclusively for the emperor and high-ranking members of his court. Bright yellow represented the central authority, and that was a color that was exclusively for him, whereas other shades of yellow could be used for lower-ranking members. The heir apparent wore apricot yellow, and the son of the emperor wore golden yellow. Blue on the right symbolizes east and the spring, and was worn by 1st to 4th degree princes or imperial dukes. White on the left represents west and autumn, but was not often worn because it was considered an unlucky color. Black at the top is north and winter, and was worn mostly for mourning. And then at the bottom we have red, which symbolizes south and summer, and is a lucky color. And so this would be worn on happy occasions, such as a bride on her wedding day. And today, because it's been so long, and the variations in the dyes that were used to create these silks, they're not the exact color that they were perhaps when they were produced. So this kind of causes historians a little bit of issue when trying to date or figure out where these robes came from. So that's something to consider, that perhaps the color that we're seeing is not the true color that it was originally intended it to be. So the document also laid out the motifs and what could be used on the robes and for what occasion. So we'll get to the robes very soon, but I'm briefly just going to talk about the process of creating silk. These silk robes, because not only are they significant in their symbolism, but also just as an artistic piece of art, are incredibly beautiful and detailed things. So the robes are made of silk, a material cultivated in China in the 4th millennium BCE. And for centuries, the process of creating silk was maintained exclusively in China. And they held all those secrets until the Silk Road, and then those secrets were let out. So, but China still maintained a monopoly in silk production for the next over 1,000 years. And so the first process of creating these silk robes would be to get silkworms. And so they would lay them, to cultivate them in these baskets on a bed of mulberry leaves, a silkworm's favorite snack, so that they would grow and mature. And then once they're matured, the cocoons of the silkworms would be soaked in water and then loosened with a brush. And then once brushed, it would be put onto a wheel where it would create one long continuous thread. The silk then, being in threads, would go onto a loom and be put onto bobbins. Then the threads would be hand brushed and spun to become firm. The threads would then be soaked again, creating this finer material, and hung to dry. And finally, the silk would then be degummed, which means there's this material on the top called saracen, and throughout the process, a lot of that gets taken out, but they need to do this final degumming process, which this man is doing here, where he hits that with a hammer, and that removes that remaining material from there. It's then woven onto looms and is decorated with the precise applique decorations that we will see in the robes. Okay, so the first robe in the museum's collection that we're going to look at is this jifu, or festive dress, known as a dragon robe. It's called a dragon robe for the dominant dragon motif used throughout, and we'll get more into that in a moment. So the layout of the robe is equally important as any other factor of the robe. The layout lays out the schematic design of the universe, which the emperor is in charge of, with symbols of heaven and earth and other auspicious symbols. The coat, that symbolism is only finalized when it is worn by someone. Because when it is worn by someone, their head there becomes the center of the universe, of which all of the other parts follow. So with the motifs of these robes, there are two different types of motifs that were reserved exclusively for the emperor. One is a series of symbols called the 12 symbols, and then the other one, like we have on our robe here, is the dragon motif. And that was worn by him and him alone, as well as him and his very close high court. So dragon designs on the front and the back of the robe were assigned to the emperor and members of the imperial family according to their status. And these dragons worn by the emperor and his very close court were called long dragons because of their 5 claws that they have. So all of the other dragons not worn by the emperor or his close court would have 4 claws. So this is how one would be able to tell that this was for him or his close court. Another clue that tells us this robe was worn by a member of the imperial family is the number of dragons included. There are 9, and that, like some of the other motifs, was reserved exclusively for the emperor and his high-ranking court members. And based on those guidelines that he set out in the document, the dragons were always on the same spot on all of the robes. There were 2 on the shoulders, 1 on the front in the chest, 1 on the back, 2 sort of in the middle, and then repeated on the back. And then there's actually a 9th dragon that's hidden from view that is on the inside of the flap, and that would be put there exclusively for the wearer to have, for their eyes only. So in addition to the color of the silk ground, which is now a golden yellow, but could have changed over time like we discussed, it would be fair to say this robe would have been worn by the emperor or a member of his high court, which would have included the empress, empress dowager, first-rank concubine, or heir apparent. Now, a robe worn by one of these individuals would have to have some very significant symbolism attached to it to reinforce the idea that the emperor is the son of heaven and give the wearer the lucky benefits of wearing the auspicious symbols on it. So we're going to start from the bottom of the robe and work our way up and talk about some of the symbolism seen there. So at the bottom of the robe here, we have these diagonal stripes, and that represents deep standing water. And that symbolizes just the depth that the emperor's rule goes to. And then from that water emerges some waves, as well as a couple different mountains. So this mountain you see right here is actually from the center here, we pulled the fabric together. And so that shows the physical earth, that realm that the emperor rules over. And then there are also many clouds that are repeated all throughout the robe, and that would symbolize the emperor's connection to heaven and as the son of heaven. There are also these various auspicious or lucky symbols included, such as the coral that we see here. And then moving up the robe, we encounter our first 2 dragons. This is taken from there. And they are chasing after these 2 flaming spheres known as the flaming pearls of wisdom. And those flaming pearls hold all of the knowledge of the universe in them. So this idea that the dragons are chasing after that, trying to obtain this knowledge. And then we also have some other auspicious symbols, such as these bats, which are a symbol of luck in Chinese culture, as well as these various blooming flowers. This is a close-up of along the neck right here. And we can see that those symbols are repeated here. We have another dragon. We have him chasing the flaming pearls. We have a bat, and then we also have the inclusion of the swastika, which is a symbol of luck and prosperity in the Chinese culture. So there are also some very special or significant symbolism, and these are 8 symbols that are known as the attributes of the 8 immortals in Chinese mythology. So these immortals were 8 individuals who achieved immortality through their good deeds. Each one is associated with a symbol that, when included on something like a robe, would act as a talisman for the wearer. Here I've isolated those 8 symbols along with the name of their counterparts, and I've also circled where you can find them on the robe. But it is interesting to note, I've only circled one, but these robes are symmetrical. So every motif that you see here is going to be repeated exactly on the other side. So these robes, again, are all about balance and symmetry. So if we have this one, it's going to be right there, that one will be right there. So starting at the top, we have the fan of Zhongli Quan, located near the neck, right there. Quan had obtained the knowledge of the elixir of life, and his attribute, the fan, can bring the dead back to life. Continuing down, we have in the center of the robe here, the basket of Lam Kahe, and the basket is associated with longevity, which Kahe carried to remind others of the transience of life. To the side of that is the bamboo rod of Zhang Go. Go was known for having a white mule that could travel a long distance with him, which when he was done traveling, he could fold up the mule and put it in his wallet. And then he would have to revive it with a small sprinkling of water, and that would bring him back to life. So his bamboo rod, his symbol, can cure illness. Next, on the bottom here, and this one actually, interestingly enough, is this symbol is only located on the back of the robe. So all of these other symbols are located on the front and the back, but this one is only on the back. And that is the lotus pod of He Sheng Yu. And the lotus pod can cultivate people through meditation, and the peaches that surround it here are associated with immortality, wisdom, and purity. Continuing to the upper right, there, we have, near the arm is the flute of Han Xianzi, and this flute can cause growth or life. Below that, right here, is the sword of Lu Dongbin, and his sword can destroy or subdue evil. Next, down here, we have the castanets of Cao Gojiao. Castanets are a percussion instrument that, when put together, banged together, would create music. And so he used these as a symbol of music. And lastly, on the bottom here, we have the double gourd of Li Tiwei, and that is used to ward off evil. You can see, you might be able to see, there's these small little gray wisps coming off of that, and that represents the soul as a formless shape. And so so the gourd is used to ward off evil from the soul. The inclusion of these symbols would be significant because they would automatically imbue the person who was wearing them with these traits. It would offer them luck, as well as reinforcing the power of the emperor. And here is a drawing of one of Qianlong's many empresses that he had. And you can see she's wearing a dragon robe, which the colors are a little bit brighter, but looks very similar to ours, which is what you'll see with any of the other dragon robes that you see. They're all very similar, and that is because of those specific regulations that were set out. by the emperor. And here is an image of the robe in the gallery, which you will all go take a look at after the talk. So now moving on to our next robe in the museum's permanent collection, and this is the other one that is currently on view in the Arts of Asia gallery. And this, like the last robe, is a jifu or festive robe, and also a dragon robe. The blue ground with gold applique inclusions and only 8 dragons found on here, there's not the secret 9th dragon, indicates that it would have been worn by either a 1st to 4th degree prince or imperial duke, or lower ranking prince, nobleman, or a high ranking official. So still very significant, like the last one. And if you notice on this one, the cut is very different from the last robe that we just saw. And that is something that someone between when this was made in the 18th century and when it was donated to the FIA in 1965, it was altered. And so it was, we see it fastens down the middle. There aren't robes that fasten like that. And so someone likely did this to maybe wear it for themselves as a dressing gown or just as a beautiful gown. So it was altered. And you can also see that the sleeves were significantly cut down, which you'll be able to see it in person much better. So like the last robe, this one is also full of symbols that reinforce the emperor's role as mediator between heaven and earth, as well as auspicious symbols to give the wearer luck and prosperity. It also includes another set of significant symbols known as the 8 Buddhist emblems. It has 6 of those on it. So moving up the robe, like in the last one, we see that deep standing water. The other one was multicolored. This one is just using that gold, which then turns into the waves, and we see a couple of mountains coming from that. There are also many auspicious symbols, such as the coral again, and the stone chime, which is a lucky symbol in Chinese culture. There's also many inclusions of the swastika, which again is for luck. And it also includes many of those other symbols that we saw. We have the dragons chasing after the flaming pearls, and there are many of those bats included as well. And it has also, like I mentioned earlier, 6 of the 8 Buddhist lucky emblems. So these are all emblems that within the Buddhist tradition, they use as symbols of luck and prosperity. So starting at the top left here, we have the umbrella, which is located here, and again, like the other robe, is symmetrical, so we would see it repeated on the other side. And the umbrella is used as a symbol of charity. So think of, you have an umbrella and you use it to cover, to help yourself or someone. Then in the center here, we have the canopy, which is a symbol of the monarch, very imperial and royal looking. Then we have the conch here, up in the right hand, on the shoulder. And then under that, we have the wheel of law, which symbolizes the teachings of the Buddha. And on the back, this is another motif that is exclusively on the back of the robe. We have the endless knot, which symbolizes eternity. And then we have the lotus flower, which symbolizes luck. Again, that one is included on the front as well. And here's an image of the robe on view in the gallery. And the last robe that we're going to be discussing is this beautiful women's overgown, and that is made of red silk with a melody of embroidered symbols. It also has 2 bands of ribbon. There's this black ribbon that goes along the edge, and then this smaller white ribbon, which is all full of different motifs as well. Red, as we talked about, is the color of luck. And so we can surmise that this dress likely would have been worn by a high-ranking lady on her wedding day. And we can infer that it was a summer wedding because this is the outer gown. It goes over the smaller gown, and it's made of a very thin material, so it likely would have been used during the summer months. To also support this idea that it was worn by a woman on her wedding day, is the inclusion of butterflies throughout the robes. You can see I isolated a couple of them, but it's really the main motif of this robe. And butterflies, they represent love and marital joy. And there's also the inclusion of the shoe medallion here, which signifies longevity, which, joy, marriage, longevity would be a very appropriate sentiment for a woman to wear on her wedding day. The robe also includes 4 of the 8 Buddhist emblems that we talked about from the first robe, which include the fan of Zhang Liquan, sword of Long Dubin, double board of Long Tigui, and the castanets of Kalgoju. So as we have seen from these robes, symbolism is a strong part of Chinese culture. To include these symbols on robes and to adorn themselves with them, many believe that their wishes would be fulfilled by wearing them. We've seen on these robes that they include symbols of wealth, prosperity, piety, and harmony, and also while reinforcing the idea as laid out by the mandate of heaven that the emperor is the ruler of the universe and all are under his domain. And with that, I will conclude and again encourage you to please come see next week's talk with Sarah Cohn. And if there are any questions about the robes or anything I talked about, we'll take those as well.
Was the red one silk too, since it was a lighter fabric?
Yes, it's silk. Yes. For the summertime, it would just be one layer of silk, and then in the wintertime, they would sew fur onto the silk, so it would be warmer.
Is the red one on display?
The red one is not on display right now, but could be sometime soon. Yes.
Yeah, how much do the robes weigh?
That's a good question. They're pretty heavy. I think it took our collection manager and our registrar to hold it. But that's also because we put this sort of padding inside of it. So I don't know. Not terribly heavy, but pretty significant. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the person that donated them and where she got them.
So I don't have information on that. I tried to look into this. One of the robes was donated by Miss Carol Pearson. Yes. Tracy she knows all about Carol.
Carol Pearson gave us a lot of works of Chinese art in the 50s, but she actually went and collected them in the 1920s. We have in our files lots of travel brochures. She was a single woman. She never married or had children, but she would go with her mother on these travels, and they're documented in newspaper clippings and things that she saved. So we don't know for sure, as Rachel said, we think she bought one of these robes on her trips to China in the 1920s. So, because after the Cultural Revolution, they weren't exactly keeping those things, There's other ways that came to the United States. There was this one Chinese dealer who was exporting things out of China to New York. So she could also have bought it there. We just don't know for sure.
Yes.
Did you say that the motifs were appliqued
Yes,
on?
so they were sewn onto the silk.
They weren't embroidered.
Oh yes, they were embroidered onto the silk. Yes, I'm sorry, that's what yes. Yes.
I just wondered, was the Empress ever allowed to have a dragon on her robe?
Yes, the Empress was as well. So the Emperor, the Empress, and then the first couple very significant women were allowed to have it on the robe, even more so than the men. So really, mostly the dragon, the 5-clawed dragon, was reserved for the Emperor, and then his females that were surrounding him.
Did regular people, just ordinary citizens, wear silk, or was that just for the upper class?
Yes, if they could afford it. These very, very, beautiful decorative ones would have been more for the upper class. People who, were not in the court probably wore something a little, less extravagant, but they could still wear these things. And then they could still wear the dragon, but it would be that 4-clawed dragon, so that no one would get confused on who that bird was. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Do you know what happened to the worms after they came out of their cocoons?
No, I do not know what happens to them. I'm guessing that their lifespan was probably pretty short, and they would only be used once. Yes.
When I was a kid, Greenfield Village had a setup of making silk.
Oh, okay.
And the chrysalis that had to be harvested before the worm would break out, because
Mhm.
otherwise that would break the threads. But they'd be dumped in boiling water, which would kill the worm.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would have multiple of these coming off and then weaving it, or spinning it into the silk thread.
Yeah, so they were really just used for the one time, and then new worms would be brought in. All right, well, again, thank you so much for coming. Please take a trip down to the gallery. You can see all the new artworks on view and 2 of the robes for yourself. And please join us next month for Sarah's talk on the